Hello, and welcome to another tutorial for Unreal Engine. This one will be focusing on level blueprints as well as sequencing for making cinematics and movable objects in your level. So the first thing we're going to kind of focus on is how to manipulate things within your level using the level blueprint. The level blueprint behaves slightly differently to regular blueprints in that it only affects objects within the level, and this can be done usually mostly with objects that are already existing in the level. You can do it with objects that are spawned in at a later time, but the general rule of thumb is to kind of stick to only doing really basic things with the level blueprint. The more advanced stuff you want to use other blueprints for, you can use things like the game mode blueprint or the game instance blueprint. But for this class, for this tutorial, we'll just be looking at the level blueprint and doing some really basic things with it. We're not going to do anything too complicated, and that's because we just don't want to spend a lot of time, wasting time trying to make complex systems when we don't really have a lot of spare time for it. So, first thing we're going to do is talk about what the level blueprint is and how it works. So the level blueprint is accessed through the blueprint section at the top and the open level blueprint section here. When it opens, it will open and look like a regular blueprint. We've already got some code in here, you won't have that, so we'll just ignore that. But you'll have begin play and event tick ghost nodes which are not activated. They're disabled until you give them some functionality. I'm just going to dock this tab up here like so. So the difference between regular blueprints and a level blueprint is that a level blueprint you can actually click and drag items from the hierarchy, the world outliner here, and you can drag them into the level blueprint to get a reference to them. You can't do that with normal blueprints, you have to access the actors a different way. So this is specific to the level blueprint itself. And I'm going to show you some examples of how you can utilize that in a moment. The next thing we're going to use is we're going to use the sequencing tool, or the cinematics tool. So we're going to create a really simple cinematic, and we're also going to have the cinematic perform a little sort of action for our character, which is just going to be making some level geometry appear. We'll make these objects appear so that it's possible for the character to go from this area here to this area over here. And we'll make that look kind of cool. We'll make those appear kind of, out of the sky, to kind of add an element of surprise and interest for the player. So in order to make this happen, what we're going to do to kind of start with is I'm just going to group these objects together. So I'm just going to highlight all these by holding Control and clicking, making sure all the objects are highlighted. And then we're going to hit Control G to group them together. So Control and G. And then these are all now grouped together, and you can see here when I move the objects, they move as one. I'm also going to group these two objects, or these three objects together. So Control G. And now all of these objects will also move together. So I'm going to move these independently of each other to kind of give like a sort of drop down effect. And we're just going to have them kind of like start really high in the sky, and then they're going to kind of come down and sort of rest here, so that when the player walks into the area, they'll actually get this little cutscene, and then they'll be able to continue on, just to kind of add a little bit of flair to the level, a little bit of interesting sort of sequence here. So there's a couple of ways we can go about doing this. The first way is just a simple trigger box way. So we're going to do that by going to the basic section of the place actors tab. We're going to select box trigger, and we're going to just drag it into our level here. Now I'm going to put it here because this is the way the player will naturally come through this area. It's just kind of the way it's sort of designed. And so I'm going to change these settings here, the box extent. We're going to change this so that it's a bit bigger, so the player will definitely run into this. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller so the player will actually have to jump up here first. But then they will definitely hit this box if they move and collect this coin. So this box will definitely be hit by the player at some point. And so I want to make sure they're actually standing here before they before it activates. That's why I'm not kind of putting it here. I want it over here. So the next step is to kind of have the level blueprint then sort of respond to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the reference to our trigger box by clicking on it, and then I'm going to go into our level blueprint and I'm going to right click, and you'll see here, because it's highlighted, it's actually giving me some sort of predefined context sensitive options here. So we can add an event, collision, and we can add an add on actor begin overlap. And what that means is when something overlaps with this object, we want something to happen. So when something begins to overlap with this object, we want to basically tell our sort of cinematic to play, our objects to move, and everything like that. So that's why we want this node here. Now you'll see I already have an existing one, and I'll kind of show you that one as well. But this one is the one we're going to be using for this example. So in order to make this work, the next thing we need to do is we need to actually add our Matinee actor. So I'm going to go to the cinematic section, and I'm going to go to add level sequence. Now we need to give this a name, and we need to give it a place to save it. So I'm just going to go into where this map is located. So I'm just going to go here. You would place it in the same spot as well, and I'm just going to call this level open sequence, because it's going to open part of the level for us. So we're just going to save that, and you'll see here down the bottom here, this asset has been made, this level open sequence, and we've also got this new sequencer window. So I'm just going to dock the sequencer window down here with my content browser, because it acts like a little animation timeline, which is really, really useful. And you'll see here in the level, it's created this little clapboard asset, which is perfect. It's exactly what we need. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to basically have it so that when we enter this trigger box, this is going to do stuff. Now we need to add some logic to this first. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a camera. So we're going to create a new camera and set it as the current camera cut. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set the camera up to be here so we can see these two assets and the player. So we're just going to create that here. Now it's going to be really zoomed in. We can change that by changing the settings on the camera, so we can change the focal length like so. We can also change the aperture to change those other settings as well. I'm just going to set the camera to be like so. Now you'll notice that we're controlling the camera because it says pilot active cine camera actor. So we're just going to make it so that it looks at these two objects. And we're going to make it go for, let's say, if we hit play, we can see how long it goes for. So if we hit play, and that's good enough, I think. 150 frames at 30 frames a second. Okay. So that's about 5 seconds. We can make it shorter by reducing the cut size. The red line is kind of the play region, and we can actually change the size of each clip by just dragging it like this. So we can make it 3 seconds long instead by just making it go from frame 0 to frame 90. Oh, sorry, frame 0 to 89, because that's it starts at 0. Okay. So the next step is that we want these objects to actually come down out of sort of scene. We want them to start really, really high up, and then we want them to come down. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to eject by stop piloting. This little button here is the eject button, so it's going to take us out of the camera. And you'll see our camera here in the level. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start both of these objects really, really high in the sky. So let's just move them all the way up. Kind of out of view of the player as well. We're just going to make them like insanely high up, so the player won't necessarily be able to see them to begin with. And then what I'm going to do is, with them still highlighted, I'm going to add a track. So we want to track the position of these objects. So we're going to go actor to sequencer, and we need add current selection 10 actors. So that's going to add all of these objects. Now, unfortunately, they don't kind of stack with each other in terms of like groups and stuff. We would have to make a separate asset for that. So I'm just going to just collapse all these for a moment. Okay. So what we can do is, in order to like basically select all our assets and make sure we find them all again, we can just press F and we can focus in on them. You can see here when I click on one of them, it highlights all of the necessary objects in the sequencer for that. So I'm going to go back to the start of my little sequencing here, and for the first part of the sequence, because they're so high up, I'm going to make them go really, really fast all the way down until we get to about sort of 1 second left, and then we're going to do it really slowly for that last second. So they'll travel basically 90% of the way in 2 seconds, and then the last 10% of the way they're going to travel over the last couple of seconds. So the way we do that is we click the track tool. So we want to track, and we specifically want to track the transform. So we're just going to hit the transform tool. They've already got transforms here. So all we're going to do is we're just going to click the add new keyframe at current time. Now there's a couple of ways you can do this. You can do it, create a key when channel's properties change. So it'll basically create a key for us every time we move an object. So I'll show you what that looks like. So at the moment there's no keyframes, but if I move this, it'll add a keyframe for the selected objects. The other way you can do it is we can set the keys to key all channel properties when only one of them changes. So for instance, if I move it, it'll add for rotation and all that stuff. Or we can just key the changed one. So at this point, it'll only change the location key. So what we're going to do is we're just going to add a key for the start here for all of these. So we're just going to go and add a key for all the transforms for all the highlighted objects. So this is a little bit, the more objects you try and move at once, the more tedious this can be. Typically, if you can, try to make a blueprint with all of these kind of objects in it, or add a single asset that combines all these objects, and you can avoid kind of having to track a lot of objects at once, like this. I'm going to click on this one, and we're just going to do the same thing. Just going to track the transform of each of these. Let me make sure I got them all. Oh, one more. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to about the 2 second mark. I'm going to go to frame 59 if I can. Okay. And now we're going to go all the way back down to our level, and we're going to try and move this object to kind of be down there instead of all the way up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of set this down. I'm just going to move this all the way. You can see here, because I've moved it, it's added keyframes, which is really, really handy. And it's also showing you the path that the object is going to take, which is also really, really useful. So I'm just going to move it down and then press F to kind of focus in on it. Because I made it so high up, it's going to take a little bit to kind of get back down to where we need to go. So just bear with me while I do that. Oh, too far. Okay. So we want it back to around where it was, which I think was kind of almost level with this. Because again, we want the player to be able to kind of jump onto it and then jump across. So we'll put it about there. That'll do. But we want it, again, we want it to kind of come down. What I actually want to do is I want it to come down to about here. And then for the last second, it's going to come down slowly and then sort of do a little bounce. So I'm going to stop it about here. And then I'm going to go to about frame 80-ish, 79 maybe. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it go beyond where I want it. So I'm going to make it come down a little bit. And then right at the end, it's going to settle right back where it's supposed to be. So it'll do this kind of like, it'll do almost like a little bounce. It'll go like boing, which is going to look nice. It's going to look pretty good. And you can change how effective that is as well. Whether it's super effective, whether it's not as effective, you'll kind of see it. So we can test what that looks like by hitting play. We can go from the start and it'll look better. So it'll zoom all the way down and then it'll kind of come in there. So I'll do that again. We'll take a closer look here. There we go. Now we can make that last a bit longer if we want to. So what I might do is I might increase the time of our matinee, of our sequence, just a little bit. So let's extend this out. We might do 4 seconds instead. So we'll go here. We'll increase this. We want it to go to 119. Because that's 120 frames. And then what I might do is I might just move this out a little bit to maybe frame 99. And I'm going to do the same for the other dots as well. So we'll just move all 3 of those dots to frame 99. And then we'll hit play again and we'll see what that looks like. That looks a little bit better. So it's not as quick. We do want that to be maybe a little bit faster. So you can highlight multiple dots at once by holding Control and clicking, and then we can just move all of these. We want the last little wobble to be kind of fast, but we want that initial kind of fall to be a bit quicker. Okay, so I might even move these dots a little bit closer as well, so it falls a little bit longer. And then come back here. Yeah, that'll do. Okay, so now we basically can do the same thing for the other cloud. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the keyframe or the slider in the same spot, but I'm just going to select the other objects. So an easy way to do that is just to click on one of the objects that hasn't been moved, press F to focus in on it, and that'll take us all the way up to this object, and then we can just click to highlight all of them, and then we can move them all simultaneously. So we're focusing on moving it down. You can move it in any direction as well. So if I move it like this, you'll see that the lines are now slanted, and it'll move in a direction. It'll move like in that direction as well. So it's good to kind of have, you know, if your level's going to have kind of that like, it's going to have something that moves diagonally or like, you know, not necessarily just straight down. It's good to kind of have that, you know, that understanding of it can move in any direction. And I appear to have moved it way too far down here. One thing you can do as well is if you're finding it difficult to kind of get it in the right spot, switch to a different viewpoint. Like right now I've switched to my left view. And now what I can do is I can zoom out and just move this so that it's closer to my environment, and then adjusting it is a little bit easier. And then I can go back to perspective view. Press F to focus on the object. Okay, here we go. So I can see here, there's my other cloud. Now I don't want these to come down, like I said before, I don't want them to come down the exact same time. So I'm going to kind of offset this one a little bit, so it's a little bit higher up, and then starts its descent a little bit differently. So we're going to move to this spot now. So this one's kind of coming down to here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to move the slider a little bit further along, and then I'm going to move this one down below. And then as the slider comes back up at about here-ish, that's when I'm going to start to move back up. And then at the end, this one will be in its correct position. So this one's going to move a little differently. So you'll see that when I hit play. And see, that looks a lot better. That looks really, really nice. So we can actually see what that looks like through the camera by clicking this lock viewport to camera. And you'll see what that looks like now when we hit play. This is what the player will actually see when they're playing the game. They'll see those appear like that, which is fantastic. So let's actually have this activate in our level so that when we reach this point, it's actually going to do that. So in order to do that, let's first unlock the camera here. And what we're going to do is we're going to set up our trigger to activate this little matinee actor here. One thing we do want to do is we want to make sure that the player doesn't run around or move during this. So I'm just going to come over to the level sequencer here. I'm going to scroll down to the cinematic section, and I'm just going to click disable movement input and disable lookout input. We can also hide the HUD temporarily, which is also a good idea. And we're just going to leave those settings like that. Now, we need it to actually play. At the moment, it's not going to play. It is only going to play once, which is good. But we don't want it to autoplay, and we want to play it when we hit this trigger box. So the way we do that, with the level sequencer highlighted, we're just going to click and drag this. Go to our level blueprint. This is why we have it docked. We're just going to drop it here. Okay. So we want to play this. So we just need to look at the sort of the sequencing tool. We can go to sequence. We can look at the different settings for this as well. One thing that you can do again is with the object highlighted, if you right click, you have a context menu. So we can add an event for when you like touch it. Or we can also call a function on level open sequence. So what that does is it takes the functions that already exist on this particular object. So you can see here, get child actors and things, and you can actually make the actor perform specific actions basically without having to necessarily look at, like, you know, setting up your own functions, because some of the functions will already exist in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag off of this, and we're going to need to get the actual sort of cinematic level sequence object. So we need a level sequence player, because we need to basically play the sequence itself. So we take the sequence player and we play it, and we drag this into here. Oops, not browse. And so when we collide with this object, we should now play the sequence from our level open sequence. And so we can test that. We could go from the start of the level, but I'm going to go from here. I'm just going to right click, play from here. We have our little character. We're going to run up here, collect these coins, and now when we jump in here, it activates our little level sequence, plays the sequence, and now our platforms are here ready for us to run along and continue through the level. Now, you can do that with, you know, what we did there with the level sequence tool. You can also do that what I just did with certain objects, and you don't have to manipulate them from the start of the level sequence. You can do that later. But what I'll also show you now is that you can also use these trigger boxes to manipulate existing blueprints as well. So as an example, let's take a blueprint. Let's go to blueprints, and let's go to a moving platform. I'm just going to drag this moving platform into our level. I'm going to switch the movement mode to lever button activated. And then we're going to change the pathing. So the way that you change the pathing on these moving platforms is you select the platform path spline component, and you'll see here, it's really kind of hard to see, but there's a little like spline tool underneath. There's this little dot. It's kind of hard to view. There's a little white dot. So you grab that. That's part of the level spline. That's part of the spline for the moving platform. So we can hold Alt, drag out to add a new spline point. You keep doing that, and if you manipulate an existing spline point, it creates kind of like a curve, like so. So this is usually activated with a button or a lever, but we can also activate it using the level blueprint. So the way we do that is we grab a reference to it, we go into our level blueprint, and when we activate this, we can also activate our moving platform. When we get a reference to it, it knows what type of blueprint it is sometimes, but sometimes it also doesn't. It just thinks it's an actor. So depending on whether it knows what type of actor this is, you might have to do a cast. But We can check that because we can look at the moving platform and we can check what variables it has. So things like lever button active, which is whether or not the platform is active. We can check to see whether that exists by typing that when we type here. So lever button active. And because it found them, it knows that that's a moving platform blueprint, which is fantastic. So we can set lever button active. And we can either set it straight away by just dragging into that and ticking the box, and that'll set that and the platform will start moving. Or what we can do is we can set a delay. So we can actually delay this by a certain number of time, by a certain time. So we can delay this by the length of our sort of sequencer by typing in the number 4, and we can do that. So that's one way that we can utilize this to kind of delay something occurring. So if you have, for instance, a door, like a door here that you want to activate after a certain amount of time, at the end of your cutscene maybe, or during your cutscene, you can delay it and then set the door to open. Now again, you can only click and drag blueprints like this inside the level blueprint. If you were to try and do it in, say, this blueprint, it wouldn't work because it wouldn't understand what you're talking about. So if I just grab something like this, and then I drop it in here, it's not going to work. So keep that in mind. When you're working in the level blueprint, you can do that, but when you're working in other blueprints, you have to find other ways of acquiring existing objects, which is why we're not getting you to do a lot of blueprint work for this class. This is optional. This is entirely optional. You do not have to do this for your level. This is just something that you can do. Okay, let's take a quick look at one more thing before we end this tutorial. This is a sort of existing... This is like the old version of the sequencer called a Matinee, which is the same kind of thing. But essentially this has created a fly-through of the entire level. So what this does is it moves this camera through the level in kind of like a fly-through fashion. I'll see if it still works. Yep, there we go. So we hit that, and then the camera does this kind of fly-through, and the camera is just, again, it's just moving along nodes. It's changing its position, its rotation, and you can manipulate all those values yourself. If you are piloting the camera, you can actually move the timeline and then move the camera, and then the position will update and change if you have that lock key item selected that we had earlier. And so this is just a basic fly through the level. So you can do something like this, and maybe it rests on like an objective that you have to complete or something like that. This is really kind of useful for letting the player know, you know, where to go. But yeah, it's totally up to you how you use this and utilize this for your level. Don't spend too much time on it. This can take forever if you know, try to make like really specific looking things. So I would caution against making very specific things and just focus on making some basic stuff. So that's essentially all this tutorial is going to basically cover for now. That's the level sort of trigger boxes and how to manipulate, you know, objects, blueprints, how to control things using the sequencer as well. I hope this tutorial was helpful. If it is, then hopefully you make something cool with it. If you have any questions or issues, just contact your lecturer, and I'm sure they'll be able to help you out. Thanks for watching.